afternoon and welcome to the Ermitinger Clark National Historic Site. My name is Ian and I work here. This is a museum that is the Old Stone House, Charles Oakes Ermitinger's Old Stone House. Now, you're joining us for the Yuletide Traditions. Yuletide is like Christmas, but before we venture inside, I'd like to show you a few things. Looking over at this window, now, the window panes, 12 on 12, was the style Mr. Ermitinger had. The lower part, just like a window you might have, if you raise it up, it's called the sash. So opening the window is raising the sash. Remember that. See these green boards? They are shutters. So, cold winter, they could close the shutters. So, throw open the shutters and throw up the sash if you wanted to see outside during the winter. Now, remember that because we're going to go inside now. So, welcome inside the front door of Charles Oakes Ermitinger's Old Stone House. This afternoon, we will be going throughout the house. You'll meet other staff, Kathy and Chris, and we will be leading you through the activities as part of the Yuletide Traditions. Charles Oakes Ermitinger settled on this parcel of land in 1808. They lived in a log cabin. They had 6 children at that point. He and his wife, Mananawe, who was an Ojibwe princess. So, in 1812, Charles Oakes Ermitinger started the construction of his mansion in the wilderness, this beautiful home. So as part of your visit with us, we'll take you through and show you some of the holiday traditions that they may have done. Different eras. Our museum today represents the Ermitinger time period through to the Pym family during the Victorian era. So, follow me and let's go to the summer kitchen.
Welcome to the Ermitinger's summer kitchen. We're standing in here today because I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the Ermitingers and their lifestyle in the early years of 1800s when they lived in the house from 1812 until 1828. Charles Oakes Ermitinger and his wife, Mananawe, he called her Charlotte. They lived here with 13 children. So in your classrooms, think about how many are sitting beside you. That could be as many siblings as they had. Not all 13 lived to be adults, but they did have 13 to begin with. And when they arrived here, actually in 1808, they had 5 children. So Mananawe is an Ojibwe princess, we called her, because her dad was the chief of a tribe in Minnesota, Sandy Lake, Minnesota, where Charles met her and wed her. And it was all during the fur trade in the early pioneer days and settlements within the northern part of what we call Ontario now, in Sault Ste. Marie, where we are today. There was very little. So he built his big mansion in the wilderness and had a separate house, the summer kitchen, which is was way back where Queen Street is now. It burnt down, so of course this is a replica. However, this is an exact replica of the hearth that they had. They cooked everything over the fire or in the bake oven. And this is where we're going to do some of our traditions that we do here during the Yuletide season. So typically, many of you will do Christmas baking and you'll have your favorite cookie recipes. Today we're going to do our favorite cookie recipe, which has a tradition as far back as the Ermitingers. So that is a gingerbread cookie. So I'm going to show you how we would do it, or the Ermitingers would have done it. And it started out mostly in the early 1800s with only the women doing the baking. The men would have other chores to do, like chopping wood for the fire or fishing and hunting. And Charles, the dad, would do a lot of the fur trading and business. And his sons were even trained in that when they went to school in Montreal. But the women did all the traditional housekeeping, cooking, cleaning. And so they would actually pass on the recipe to the daughters, the granddaughters, the nieces. And it was never written down then because, you know, in the early 1800s, early pioneers, they had to write with quill and ink. Or they did have some graphite coming when they ordered their supplies from Montreal. So the recipe really didn't get written down. You had to remember. And if it's only a traditional cookie for this time of year, you had to actually remember for a whole year how that recipe happens. The other thing I want to point out is that they didn't have measuring cups. So did you bring your measuring spoons and measuring cups today? I bet you did. As we go through, I'll point out how and what you'll use. So we're going to start with, as you can see, no plastic dishes like you have at home. The Ermitingers did have pottery, they had fine china, and they had a lot of things that they would just keep to use for measuring. So we're going to start, this recipe actually starts with a little bit of butter. This is about a half a cup. And do you know where butter came from? And how we would get it ready? It would be one of those chores that the boys probably would have to go out, or maybe the young girls, and milk the cow and bring the cream and milk in. And right here beside me is the butter churn. And so before we even get butter, you'd have to pour it in the churn, and then it's actually churning it to get it thick. Now if you want to try this in your classrooms or at home, you can actually buy nowadays in our modern grocery stores 35% cream, pour it into a mason jar with a lid, and shake it. In about 20 minutes, you will have it separate, and you'll have butter, and you'll have then buttermilk for your baking. But that's what happens in the butter churn. So we're going to start with that half a cup, and we're going to actually get it sort of mushed into our bowl. And then we're going to add, see my fancy measuring cups? This is what they used, the broken teacup. And I used a little blue willow bowl that had the butter in it. And this was a pattern that came from England. It's bone china, and so they would have had to order it. Charles and Mananawi would order it from Charles's brother in Montreal, and he'd order it from England. So this measuring cup is for our next ingredient, and inside the cups there is sort of a line on the inside of these particular pattern, and that's where I'm going to measure to. So that's how they measured. So I'm going to pour this next ingredient is. Does anyone want to take a guess what that is? Molasses. Molasses is actually the product that comes from when you are making brown sugar. So this is the brown liquid that comes out when they call it a byproduct from making brown sugar. So of course we're going to want to use molasses in a lot of our baking because it still gives that thick and rich taste. And it's what gives the gingerbread that dark coloring instead of using brown sugar. Because the Ermitingers actually did not have brown sugar, they could have used a different ingredient when they were baking, and that would have been This is sugar stuck to my plate. So, this is actually maple sugar, this whole brick. And that is a pound of maple sugar. Now, that would have been made and actually traded so that the indigenous people here in Sault Ste. Marie, in surrounding areas, maybe up in Batchewana, they would actually tap the trees and bring in maple syrup or maple sugar for the Ermitingers, and they would trade for other goods. Maybe some china, maybe some beads. Now, so they could have used that. The other option would be white sugar, and white sugar at the time came in a paper cone, and anything with a wax seal was done to, because we didn't have tape. 200 years ago, it was just all sealed with a wax seal. Charles Ermitinger had an actual engraved ring, and that would be what he sealed his letters and envelopes with, so that you would know that it was coming from him. So that little cone of white sugar is refined in bigger cities like Montreal, and that would be equivalent to about $100 now. So it was really hard to get. So of course, like I said, we're using molasses or maple sugar. So next I'm going to add in the sugar. So because molasses is kind of tart, so we are adding in enough to go to that blue line in the broken teacup. Now, how many cook and they like to see their cakes and things fluff up so that you have a nice fluffy cake? In order to get our gingerbread to rise up in the oven, we have to add a baking soda or baking powder. Now, 200 years ago, that was done by taking the ashes from beside the fire, putting them in a pot of water that would hang on this swing arm on the hook, and you'd boil those ashes. Then you would take the layer of boiled ashes and dry them. Those are called pearl ash. And pearl ash would make your cakes rise and make them fluffy. It was like the baking soda or baking powder, except that it did turn white cakes a little green or gray and a little more bitter than what we're used to. For today, I'm going to actually just use the baking soda and baking powder. Today it's baking soda, and this is where I said, did you bring your measuring spoons? So measuring spoons at the time were the palm of your hand, and if you cup it like this little section down here is where you can get a teaspoon or a tablespoon. So that is about a teaspoon. It's just a little tiny bit in there. But we want really fluffy ones, so we're going to do a tablespoon. And if you sort of pat it around and get the whole bottom of your hand filled, that's a tablespoon. Always make sure when you're using your hands and cups and things to always be baking with clean hands. Now, have you heard of the phrase, a pinch of salt? That's what we're going to put in. But I actually like putting in about 2 pinches or 3, just for a bit, because we were using, remember, the cream from the butter churn, which today is an unsalted butter. So we're going to stir that up. Now, it's not anywhere near getting ready to roll out to make our cookies. So we have to, first of all, put in an egg to get it even more creamy before we add our flour. Eggs today come in white and brown, but when the Ermitingers lived here, they were typically brown eggs, and it doesn't, the color of the shell doesn't make a difference. Inside we're all the same, right? So the eggs are the same. So we're going to add 1 egg, make this nice and creamy. Normally I would put that in there first just to make sure I didn't get any eggshells. This is the first time around for my Christmas recipe, so I forget all my little tidbits. Now, this is called a gingerbread. So in order to get it to taste like ginger, we have to actually add some spices. So, first we're going to put in nutmeg. And nutmeg, in a little while, you're going to learn about spices when we go into another room of the Old Stone House. Nutmeg came to the Ermitingers in a whole nutmeg. And the Ermitinger girls would grate it on a grater. Nutmeg's really easy to grate. Fresh nutmeg is the best to put in your recipes. Today, you can actually go to the grocery stores and buy ground nutmeg. Oh, the smell of ground nutmeg's the best. Now, I'm just putting enough in to get that flavor, and I've used about that much of the nutmeg. Measuring was not a science then. It was just what you thought looked good. And you'll see how we get to adding flour. It's not measured. So the next ingredient is a bit of a cinnamon stick. And this is how the sticks came. And it would have to be grated too. That takes forever. That would have been a chore for one of the children that you thought was probably not behaving that day, or that needed to sit down and rest for a while from daily chores, because cinnamon takes a long time. Now, I'm adding in, as you can see, a tablespoon again. Lots of cinnamon. Now, today's recipes also ask you to put in ginger. So again, ginger root would have had to be grated and put in the recipe, but you can get powdered ginger. And when you go to make it at home, add in about a spoonful, a teaspoon. Ginger's a little more strong. So now I'm getting ready to get this to the point where I need to roll it out to make our cookies. In the day of the Ermitingers and the early settlers of Sault Ste. Marie, you would have had to actually order your graters, your cookie cutters from the blacksmith. And the blacksmith would have made actually all of the tools that we're using at the hearth. He would have bent tin into cookie cutters, and he would have made the perforated lanterns and the graters for us. There was 3 blacksmiths in Sault Ste. Marie at the time of the Ermitingers, and especially because one was attached to the Hudson Bay Company, which is down, if you're in Sault Ste. Marie, down towards the canal. And right now we have the machine shop and the mill market down there. And that's where the original Hudson Bay Post was. So there was a blacksmith attached there, but there were 2 others along the main street of Queen Street at the time. It wasn't named Queen Street. That didn't happen until 1847. So I'm going to now add my flour. We're going to keep adding flour. Now, for those of you in grade 3, you're probably learning about the grist mill. The grist mill was one of the types of ways that you could actually grind your flour. Mr. Ermitinger had one. It was on the front of his property. It had a big water mill that would actually take the mechanics of the grinding stones and move them in opposite direction and grind the wheat and into corn flour. There, you could get corn flour, you could get wheat flour, and he was the only one in Sault Ste. Marie at that time that had a mill to prepare the flour. Before that, you could grind in a corn pounder, which was a tree stump hollowed out and a great big pounder, or between 2 rocks. Lots of work went into making flour. It wasn't until the early 1800s that the grist mill came to Sault Ste. Marie with the Ermitinger family. Charles had about 50 employees, and a lot of them worked in the grist mill, or they worked on the farm, like in the crop gardens and stuff. He had about 30 acres of gardens, and his property actually was right here. And if you're living in Sault Ste. Marie, it would have gone up the hill to Canadian Tire, from the old hospitals on the waterfront over to the old PUC building. So parents that are in town, it's actually Precious Blood Cathedral to the old hospitals and up to Canadian Tire. That was his plot of land here in Sault Ste. Marie. And as I said, 30 acres were cleared for gardens, and the front of it on the water's edge was the grist mill. Now Mananawi had an herbal garden and sacred plants that she would have used for medicinal purposes as well. And we have some of those today during the summer. But we'll get into plants and things and all the purposes of those plants in just a short minute. Now I'm almost at the point to roll this out. And as you can see, I just keep adding flour. I'm trying to get it like Play-Doh. So when you make these at home and you get the recipe from us, we're trying to get it so it's like Play-Doh. Now all of these dishes will have to be washed later by one of the girls, but one of the brothers would have brought in the water, and the water would have to be warmed over the fire on the swing arm. And that is, if you were one of the boys, you would actually put on the yolk, and you would hang a bucket on each end. So you'd have one hanging on each side, and then you'd carry one on each side, because you didn't want to make your trip way down to the river like you wanted to bring as much water back to the kitchen as possible. 13 children, 2 parents, 50 employees. That's a lot of buckets of water just to wash your hands. We take a lot for granted now. So I'm going to move this bowl out of the way so you can see. And I'm going to take some of my flour and throw it on my cutting board here. Because this is such a fresh dough, it's pretty sticky still. And you probably know when you're working with Play-Doh. So, that little bit of flour is called the bench flour. And it's just for that purpose, to throw on the bench. Now, as I'm standing here and kneading the dough to a consistency with the flour, I'm really warm in front of this fire by their hearth. And I'm going to just sort of show you and point out that we have windows all around the old stone house. There are actually 25 windows on the house itself with shutters, and the windows have 2 parts. The bottom part you can open by throwing up the sash. I want you to remember that. That's coming in later in our talk. So the windows just open by pushing up the bottom half, which I may have to do soon. Whew. Okay, we're going to roll out and get a few of these cookies cut for you with our tinsmithed cookie cutter. Here's another job for someone. Someone that can whittle their wood can make rolling pins for us. If you've not done cookies, you have to actually roll this out so it's fairly thin, so the cookies cook in the oven fast, right? And you want to get as many cookies out of your batch as possible, because you're feeding how many? 13 children for the Ermitingers for Christmas, plus the employees, plus the parents, plus anyone that comes to visit. The Ermitingers were what we would think of today as fairly wealthy and well off, and they would send invites to people to come for dinner. They were not quite the typical pioneer that was living in Canada at the time. They did have the abilities to build the old stone house and to have some of these luxuries by bringing in china from England. Okay, I'm going to use my cookie cutter and cut out some of these. Now I had enough flour, as you can see on the, that I'm going to, it flipped right out. If you can't lift it off, you didn't have enough flour, that's okay, use a lifter. This is one made by the blacksmith here, our little lifter. So you cut out enough cookies and you just keep rolling out your dough until you have no dough left after you've cut out all your cookies. So I would roll up the scraps, roll it again, and cut out more cookies. So I'm going to just put these few on my pan. This is a small pan because I'm going to show you it only, this particular one is the size they would have had to use in the bake oven. And the bake oven is right here beside me, as you can see behind me. And we're going to get these into the bake oven. Now the oven is not like ours at home. When you go to use this oven, there's no window, there's no timer, and so we have to try and hope that we can smell some of those spices that we put in there. If not, the Ermitingers would light a candle, and they knew exactly how far down a candle it would take because their candles would be uniformly hand dipped with beeswax. So they knew the exact time for, let's say, an inch down the candle. That might be enough time to cook the cookies. Now we're going to shovel out some of the hot coals so that we don't burn the bottom of the cookies. And the hot coals go here into the hearth for baking other things, or they could go down here underneath this stone shelf. And that way, if you have bread rising in the middle shelf, it would keep the heat for you. And that was the purpose of that area of the hearth. This is a hot oven today. I'm going to just be quiet for a minute when I'm shoveling because you're going to hear those hot coals. It's like ice crackling. So this, when it gets all emptied out, the stones in here are hot enough. Now, we would have had to light this fire about 4 or 5 hours ago in order to get the stones of this oven inside hot enough to bake. So because I have left a lot of hot coals in there, I'm actually going to put one of our cast iron baking pans in there so that I don't burn the bottom of the cookies. Now, that's a really hot oven, and the reason I know that is if I can hold my hand in the entranceway and count to 10, it's a 350-degree oven like yours at home. If I have to pull my hand out, it's a hot oven. So we're going to count to 10. 1, 2, 3. I had to pull out at 3. We're going to have to really watch those cookies today. So we're going to place that in there. Of course, it's also hot because I've got extra coals in there today. Those might only cook in about 3 minutes, I think, because I only got to 3. So I will check on those while we do something else today. So I'm actually going to now continue to do these and continue to cut out cookies. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to hand over the next section of your visit with us to Chris. who's going to take you through another activity.
It's so exciting to come here and learn about the traditions that were happening with the pioneers in the 1800s. I know you're also all excited, most of you are excited about another holiday that's coming out, which is Christmas. Some of you may be celebrating different holidays, and some of you may just be happy of the time period just to be off and to celebrate it with family. And that Christmas, the Ermitingers celebrated Christmas, and many of the things that they were excited about and celebrated were the same things that most of you are getting excited about. They were excited about being with family, about playing different Christmas games outside, about cooking, the baking, and of course also about Christmas time and getting presents. And so most of the things were the same. They're exactly the same, but there were some things that were a little bit different in that time. And let's talk about presents. Back then, they didn't have the same kind of variety of presents that we have now. And they couldn't really kind of just go to the store and buy their presents, or of course some would come from Santa Claus, but what the other presents that they had to get for each other, most of the times they had to make them. And that's what you guys just did, or what Kathy just showed you when she was making the gingerbread cookies. And you guys, that's where our presents are going to be today, our gingerbread man. But you know that once you make your present, you want to wrap that present. And back then, they had to do everything, they had to make everything that they wanted to do. So what we're going to do today is we're going to I'm going to go through how they would have possibly made their presents, their wrapping paper and presents. And so what we're going to use as wrapping paper is just paper bags. And the first thing that they would do is we're going to stamp those paper bags. And so the first thing we're going to do is stamp it with a potato. And now you see that we have to make our stamp. Back then, the early pioneers had to make everything. And they made their stamp out of a potato. But you can make a stamp out of many different other things, like wood, antler horns, and they would have to always use their imagination to whatever they're making. Now the other thing that we have to do is when we're making our stamp, we need some ink. But back there, the Ermitingers, you couldn't just buy ink, they had to make their own dyes. And this is also not only the Ermitingers, but the natives had to make their own dyes too, to dye things like their clothes and different types of things. And so most of their dyes was made with plants. And they used different types of plants that they would know to make different types of dyes. And in order for these dyes to stay in the clothes, like if they would make dyes by grinding up the different types of plants and mixing them with water. And if they put that to make the dye just by itself, the dye would wash off. So they had to use to add something else or soak the cloth with something that was called a mortan. And the natives used to make these. Sometimes they'd get alum from boiling soil. They would also get tannins from sumac bark, leaves, and berries. And also they would also get another one, that ammonium from, they would have to use stale urine and manure. And what they would do is take these type of ingredients, soak whatever they were going to dye in them, like the cloth, and then when they put the dye in them, the dye would stay in them. So that's what they had to make. So this is a green dye, which probably would have been made from leaves and whatever. And so right now I'm going to show you what you're going to do. And so you take the potato, and I'm going to do it 5 times so you guys can remember every sequence of what you were doing. So you take the potato, you dip it in the dye, like this, and you stamp it twice on the paper. And so I'll do it again. You dip it once. I think this dye is, and stamp it twice anywhere on the paper. Now once you've done that, it's going to take a while for it to dry. So you just have to set this aside and wait for your stars to dry. Now I have some papers that are already stamped, and I'm going to show you again what to do after that. After you've done this, what you're going to do is open the bag where it's dried, and you're going to take 2 cookies and you're going to put them in the bag. And then once you've done that, you're going to take your bag and fold it together so it's together at the top, so you have 2 sets of 4 holes. And then you're going to fold it over so you have 2 sets of holes. And when you stamp it, you're going to notice that the stars are on the front, and then you've got your little stamp on the back. And so then the next thing you're going to do after you're going to take your string and you're going to take it on the side without the stars and put one end through the hole and take the other end of the string and put it through the other hole and pull it through. This way you're going to have both set of strings laying down in front of the stars. And then you're going to take the 2 strings, and your teacher can always help you when you're doing this, and wrap them around each other and then pull them tight. And then you're going to make a loop like this, or the story that I was always told, you make a tree, and then you take this string is the rabbit, and the rabbit goes around the tree and through the hole and pulls tight, and you got your bow. And there, that's done. That's the first one. So I'll go through it again. And then once you've finished that, you have your present. Your little present, it can go in your stocking. This one could fit in your stocking or underneath the tree. And the one good thing about this present is like it's got 2 cookies in it. So if you actually, you can do whatever you want with it. You can give it to yourself, or you can share it with your brother and sister because there's 2 cookies, or you can give it to a friend as a present too. So that's how in the Ermitingers time period they would have had to make their own wrapping paper and wrap their own gifts. And they would have also have had to make their own present. Not like today where we can just go to the store and we have such a variety of presents to make. So back then you used to have a very good imagination to come up with a good present for your family that they would like. So Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Hey, do you remember my name? I hope you do. It's Ian, and we're in a different room in the old stone house. It's the winter kitchen. You were in the summer kitchen if you're following along. The winter kitchen was used during the colder months of the year. They wanted to keep that heat inside. So there would have been a fire in the fireplace, but remember, we're a museum, so we can't just let fires burn unattended. So in the winter kitchen, during the Yuletide season, that Christmas time, all the foods were made, not just for daily meals, but for the special occasions and the feasts. So in this kitchen, I want you to look around and see what's missing that you have in your kitchen at home. There were lots of new technologies, that's a big word, like a fridge, a stove, you might have a microwave, you might have a table with chairs in part of the kitchen, and cupboards along the walls. You might not have a cradle, a butter churn, and things hanging that look like food. So part of the storage back then and preserving the food looks like decorations, so some of the different things. Now, the Yuletide season was a time of year for friends and family. We're doing that a little different this year. Now, back in pioneer times, they had different smells in the house. Ones that would probably be really smelly. They didn't have indoor wash sinks. They didn't have indoor bathrooms. And they didn't have refrigeration. No fridge, no freezer. They'd have to bury those things outside in the winter in the snow to keep things cold. So foods went bad if they didn't eat them soon enough. So smells were quite unpleasant. So if you were having a celebration for the Yuletide, you might have had simmering spices. So when you do this, you might just be watching to follow along, That's good. If you were here, I would have you holding open your envelope, So you might need to do that. And then we would put some different spices. I'm going to start, so you might be watching more of my hands doing, and not so much me. That's okay. So we're going to start with cloves. Now, with your spice, they look like little nails, And they're little wooden nails, and that's what the clove in French for the spice, it is about a little nail, And cloves have a wonderful smell, and the ground up cloves were part of the gingerbread. A next spice, it's here, is one that was used for wonderful meals, fish and meat, and some baking for sweets and treats as well, and it's called rosemary. It's got not as strong a smell as cloves, but it is the aroma and the flavor when it's baked and boiled, comes out. Now, none of the kids got one that was this big, This is a piece of cinnamon. Cinnamon is the tree bark, okay, from a special tree, and it's originally was grown in Sri Lanka. So your kit probably has some broken pieces, so put one inside as well. Cinnamon's got a wonderful flavor and taste. Now, the next one is fennel. And fennel is part of the seed of a plant, okay, of the fennel plant. And fennel is quite interesting. It looks like a fat celery stalk growing, okay? We're gonna put some fennel in. Now I'm gonna try and hold one up between my finger and thumb, which is always fun to try. And challenge. See how tiny that is? Now, a candy maker, or someone making candy long, long ago in pioneer time, would take a fennel seed and they would melt some sugar. And they would dip the fennel seed into the sugar, let it dry, and dip it again over and over and over, 100 times maybe, so that it had a little ball of candy. Some of you and your teachers might remember a candy called a jawbreaker. Some of you may know that as well. Jawbreakers were layers of candies, but the candy using a fennel seed inside was called a sugar plum. Remember sugar plums because you might hear it in a story a little bit later. Now, this is a really pretty spice, okay? And it's star-shaped. Other shapes that you might be able to think about, maybe you can share with your classmates. What does it look like? But we've broken up some pieces, and so they're a little bit smaller. A big piece, if we simmered, the simmering is putting the spices into water on the stove and heating up the water. If we put a full star in, the power and fragrance would overpower everything. So I'm just going to put a piece in, and you have those as well. Our last spice they look like little dry berries. And that's basically what they are. It's called allspice. And it's a dry berry from a plant. And the name allspice came from the early explorers because it has the same flavors of cinnamon and cloves and ginger mixed in together in one plant. So putting those in, and now the hard part might be, okay, we're gonna seal the envelope. So with the different spices, they were used for different things. Now, I know that one of our camera people today portrays a medical doctor, pioneer doctor, and cloves were used back then by the doctor if someone had a toothache. You would take the clove and put it in beside the aching tooth, and the oils from the clove makes that pain go away. And you know what? I had a toothache one time, and I used a clove, and it took the pain away. I did go to see the dentist. So, cloves can be used to decorate. And in the teacher's kit, one activity that might be done is taking an orange and sticking cloves in it. The oil from the cloves mixing with the juice from the orange releases a wonderful fragrance. And this was one way that people could decorate, but also add flavor and aroma to their home. So, I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the spices. Maybe you can research with your teacher some of the other spices that were used making gingerbread men. So, here I am again. We're in the dining room. This is a formal room in the Ermatinger Old Stone House. It's very fancy, and they would have used it for fancy meals. So in the Yuletide season, it was the place to meet and eat. A feast, wonderful food from the harvest and from the livestock was greeting the guests and the family. One early dessert is a plum pudding and wonderful, delicious things. Mr. Ermatinger was famous for his caribou dinners. Caribou ran wild long, long ago. It's like a deer. So he had his annual caribou dinner. Do you have a Christmas tree at your house? Not all houses and customs used Christmas trees. Some today still don't. Long ago, early tradition was to decorate and put a wreath or garland of greenery, evergreen or cedar, around the candelabra or chandelier. And the candles would be lit. We're in the museum, so we don't have these candles lit. But why do you think there are candles way up high on the mantle in front of the mirror? I'm pretty tall, but I can't see myself in the mirror. Candles were lit in front of the mirror so that the light from the candle would help brighten up the room. On dark evenings, it was hard to light the room. They had a fireplace, but early to bed and early to rise was what they lived by. So as the sun went down, they were probably cozy in bed. So, our next room that we're going to visit is a special room called the parlor. Now on Christmas morning, tradition was that the children would wait outside the door, closed door of the parlor, and wait until it was time to be let in. So, I'll meet you there. We're in the parlor now, and in our museum we call it the early parlor. Back, as I was saying, Christmas morning the door would be opened and the children would come in and see that St. Nicholas or Santa had brought the Christmas tree. Back in pioneer time, trees were a little bit tinier, might have been on a table, or this one on a chest. Okay, so if you can look closely at this tree, see some of the differences between long ago and your tree now. How many have real candles on their trees? Back then we didn't have electricity, so they used candles. And from the tinsmith or the blacksmith, they would have special holders with a real candle. Now we're in the museum, so not using a lit candle this time. You can see the flickering lights, and those are battery tea lights that give you the idea that the candles are lit. So, because the tree had real candles, they also had a bucket of water sitting right beside the tree in case they needed to put out a fire. Scary. Now, on Christmas, you might have a present under the tree. Hope so. Back then, the presents weren't wrapped like this. Remember the brown paper packages tied up with strings that you did with Chris? The presents actually were on the tree. So there might be a pipe, spice grater, we use that in the kitchen, and fruit and berries and other presents that were special. Maybe a kerchief for mama or one of the girls, and they usually got one present. Now, when we were baking the gingerbread cookies, what do you think the pioneers might have done with those eggshells from the eggs? Well, they could have ground them up and fed them to the chickens or put them into the compost. How many of you have a compost? How many of you have chickens? So, back then what they could do is, from the wool from their sheep and lambs, they could make strings and make little hanging baskets on the Christmas tree in hopes that St. Nicholas might fill it with some berries or some nuts. I'd be excited with that. So most of the decorations came from nature. They, as I said, were also the presents. The blacksmith may have made, or later the tinsmith, some fancy ornaments. And this is one, it's hard to see, it's pretty shiny, it's an icicle. How many have icicles on the earth tree at home? Pretty special. These ones fall off all the time, so I might not be able to get it to stay. Great. So that's one tradition from long ago. How many have a tradition of one of these? Do you know what it is? Yes, it's a stocking. So some of us may know about a stocking hanging by the chimney or the fireplace with care. But long ago, it was pretty different. Long ago, the girls and boys wore wool socks all the way up their legs because it was cold out. So before going to bed, they would take off their long wool stockings, that's what they were called, boys and girls, and lay it out by their bed, or maybe on the couch or settee in the parlor, in hopes that a present might be. Now, it would probably be way down in the toe, and St. Nicholas or Santa Claus probably just brought one or two things. They may have had an apple, okay, back then. Later, oranges were really popular. Some people even have an orange today. Now, what do you think this is? A candy cane? Oh, very close. It is a candy stick. Or a peppermint stick. The hook part of the candy cane had not been invented yet. So a peppermint stick was a good thing to have as a treat. And if the girls and boys were good girls and boys, they would have a wonderful celebration and maybe a present or two. How many presents do you think you'll get this year? I hope you get one. So we're going to pause it right there, and I'll see you in a bit. We are now on the second floor of the old stone house. When the Ermitingers lived here, all of the rooms upstairs were bedrooms. As part of our museum, we show different time periods in the house. We are in the Victorian parlor. Victoria, a name of a Queen of England, Queen Victoria. When Queen Victoria became the Queen, she married a Prince Albert from Germany. Germany has many early Christmas traditions, and Prince Albert brought many of those to Queen Victoria. So now we celebrate many of the things that they learned about. Fancy ornaments on the tree. The tree could be a small tree or a grand tall tree. Some of you may have a small tree or a grand tall tree. The ornaments that you see on the tree might be more similar to what you have. Still no electricity, so there were candles. Popcorn garlands were popular, still today. And this wonderful garland made of paper called Victorian paper lace. Presents now were under the tree, but not all of them were wrapped up. So the different gifts that were under, and you can still see fruit and maybe that apple, okay, so different things. Glass ornaments, similar to our decorations today, were very popular. So, that Victorian paper lace. We have a tight crease, and you can see the lines that are on the paper to help you. Now, I hope you're practicing scissor cutting, and if you have problems with it, that's okay, don't worry about it. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to cut on the side that has the fold. It doesn't matter what side, okay? But can you see on your paper where the line comes right to the end of the paper or the edge? That's the side you want to cut. If you look along the line, there's a little bit of paper that doesn't have a line on it. Don't cut that. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to cut the next one. Did you see that I skipped a line? I'm going to come back to that. How's the cutting going? Now take your time, and if you're just watching the instructions, that's good because you can always do the cutting slowly. Now if you're a lefty, you've got your lefty scissors. Now, can you imagine Queen Victoria sitting and cutting paper lace? She probably had other people to do it. If you need help, maybe somebody can help you. Great! So I've cut all along one side, and I'm going to turn it around. Pardon me. I've been talking a lot today. And we're going to turn it around so that you have the other lines. Now my fold is a little off, but it doesn't go right to the end, but you can see that I want to cut that. So I'm going to cut and carefully move along. Don't rush, if I'm going too fast. I'm going to go all the way through this piece so you can see how it's done. I love these scissors. They make a lovely snap sound when you... So I'm cutting all the way along. Good work. Oh, I'm tired. Did you get done too? Now can you see, if I pull it apart gently, it's quite a fancy piece of paper. I can just hang this on the tree or tape it to a present, tape it on the wall if I'm allowed or if you're allowed. But a tricky part of this is, remember how the paper had a fold? Let's see if we can unfold. And this takes patience. Oh, do you know what that word is? When I was your age, my mom told me I didn't have patience. I'm glad I've learned as I've gotten a little bit older. So see how I'm pulling it apart? If you liked it the way before, or if you're finding it a little frustrating, you can just leave it folded together. It'll work too. Good. It takes good patience and concentration. Almost done. Now, I'm going to press it down. One trick I like is I flip it over so that the bump is there, but I'm going to press it down a bit. And watch what happens when I'm going to move these papers out so you can see it against the darker material here. When I pull, hang on to one end, hang on to the other, and I pull it gently apart. Now, the neat thing with the holes is I can stick one hole over a branch on my tree and use it to decorate. Okay? So,
It can hang and do different things, however you'd like, or tape it on a parcel. Do you know what's special is? You can make them pretty fancy by using wrapping paper. Can you imagine how cool it would look with princess wrapping paper or Spider-Man paper? Well, I know we're talking long ago, but we're living in the here and now. So make it however you would like, and we're happy that you visited. We've got one more treat for you, but this is the last you'll see me, so I'm going to say, from the Ermatinger house, Mr. Ermatinger spoke Swedish, French, and learned Ojibwe. I'm going to say Joyeux Noël, and I'm going to say Merry Christmas. Bye. Again, my name is Ian.
Welcome back to the summer kitchen. You've been through the Ermatinger house. We've made our gingerbread cookies by now. They baked in the bake oven, and just so you know, they only took about 3 minutes. Then you packaged them with Chris and made homemade wrapping paper. And you went through then to find out the significance and how hard it was to get spices here during the pioneer days and the early settlers. And the Ermatingers would have had to order those from Montreal. And then you traveled through time, through our rooms of the house and our story steeped in stone, to learn about Victorian era and traditions at Christmas and Victorian lace. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a story today. This story is as old as the old stone house. Now, all of you, I'm sure, have heard it before. "'Twas the night before Christmas." But as we went through our story today, we told you little hints of things that are in this particular book and this story. So I'll pause as we get to those so you remember when we were in the house, so that we can talk briefly before we move on in the story. So get comfy in your chairs, because 'twas the night before Christmas. So, 'twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. Now, I think Ian spoke to you about stockings and what they were like 200 years ago. They were just the big ones that you took off from the knee down. Different treats were put in those stockings. The children were nestled, all 13 of them, all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. So now you know what it takes and what the story is behind the sugar plum. Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew in a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. Remember, I said to remember the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to all the objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. Don't forget, this was 200 years ago originally written. Rudolph wasn't born then. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and they whistled and shouted, and he called them by name. You can do it with me. Ready? Now Dasher, now Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away, all. As dry leaves that before the wind, wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, they mount to the sky. Have you ever seen the leaves in the wind? They kind of mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the cursors they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkle I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head I was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. Now in the old stone house he'd have to pick between the summer kitchen and all 4 of those rooms. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. Soot is that black stuff on the wall back there from burning the fires. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe, did you see the pipes in the rooms? The old-fashioned clay pipes? He held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump and a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to work. He filled the stockings and then turned with a jerk. As laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up that chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh. His team gave a whistle. Try whistling. I can't whistle. And away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him explain as he drove out of sight. Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. So you've now heard the story that's as old as the old stone house. And some of those things in this story, we've shown you the traditions that went on 200 years ago. I want to thank you for joining us. So enjoy the holidays and stay safe.